right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Defiant Weekly Recap, where we discuss all the biggest headlines of the week every Friday. So thank you all for joining, and special thanks to Sara from Uniswap, who's here to talk about Uniswap V4. Sara Reynolds is the head of protocols at Uniswap, the biggest decentralized exchange. So welcome, Sara. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks for having us. That's quite a big title. I'm definitely not the head, just one of our protocol engineers. But very excited to be here and excited to kind of unwrap V4 with you all.
Amazing. And of course, Owen and Jeremy are staff reporters here. Myself, Cami, founder. And for all the YYC fans out there always asking for him, he'll be joining in the second half of the show, and he'll be also in the comments. So, okay, so today's show will obviously talk about Uniswap, but we'll also talk markets. There was a Fed rate decision this week. There was a bit of trouble with Tether, with USDT slipping below the $1 peg. There was NFT action with a Sotheby's sale. Then there was questions about CRV leverage. Tons going on in DeFi this week. But let's start with our biggest story of the show, Uniswap. So Sara, Uniswap announced that it is releasing the code of its V4. So maybe let's just start with going through kind of what the biggest changes are versus V3 and V2.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, I think first off, one of the bigger changes is just in terms of, how we're kind of bringing this to the community. The code is, unfinished. We have sort of an idea and a direction of where we want to take the protocol. But really we're excited to kind of get input from the community. And I think most importantly too is, make changes that are good for integrators, things like that. So I think that's actually one of the biggest changes just in terms of like how we're kind of bringing it forward to the community. I think with respect to, V3 and kind of the more technical side of things, V3 was really a groundbreaking moment for AMMs. It, introduced concentrated liquidity, and really gave this kind of level, entirely new level of expressiveness to LPs. And that's not changing, right? So, V4 still has this notion of concentrated liquidity, giving this sort of expressiveness to LPs. It's still a non-upgradable, immutable protocol, and it's still an AMM. But what we see here is kind of a massive change in the level of expressiveness you get with it as a pool creator, right? So this kind of brings in this idea of what we're calling hooks, which essentially allows you to customize pools and kind of leverage the essentially platform and AMM model and the V3 style pools that V3 introduced, but kind of tailor it to your specific kind of integrator needs.
And so we V4 will still have concentrated liquidity. And then the main change is that there's these hooks which allow developers to modify how the DEX works. Like what
Right.
kind of things are you expecting people will want to build?
Totally. I think, yeah, so hooks definitely is one of the biggest changes. There's a few other, I think, changes I can go into later as well, more like sort of architectural changes. But just to kind of dig into hooks, maybe give a little color there. In V3, we had to make, certain opinionated decisions about what we were building into the core protocol. And so one of these things is, for example, the Oracle. And swappers are, paying for updates to the Oracle, at every block. And so there is some gas overhead with, the more features and things that you build into the core protocol. In V4, we kind of push that to the edges a little bit in the sense of, okay, let's make core tight, but let's allow sort of these arbitrary plugins and things to kind of happen up to the pool creator. And so I imagine that, Oracles is going to be like one of these really big use cases of, people having a very specific design for their lending protocol or whatever. And, they want to get a certain price feed and tailor it exactly to how they want to get that on-chain price data, and that can be done through a hook.
So like, I talked to Dan Elitzer a while ago, and he was kind of putting forth this like kind of subtle argument about bring your own Oracle protocols and kind of abstracting that away from like the lowest layer. Like, will V4 be used as an Oracle? If that kind of bring your own Oracle trend continues, will it be used as an Oracle in other protocols? Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, totally. I think that's definitely one use case that we've thought of. And there's kind of a few different ideas, we have for hooks, but I imagine, there's probably a lot we don't know about what you can build with hooks. There's just so much out there. And that's also kind of one of the more exciting ideas of like, maybe we have sort of a canonical kind of Oracle contract that we've put forth, but like, just an example. And, there might be another few projects that are like, actually, we think this Oracle design is better, and maybe that one takes off. And that's kind of the, best sort of Oracle on V4.
Right on. But like V4 will serve as like an Oracle source potentially for other projects. And is that already done on V3? Do people already use?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. V3 does have, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier, is there's an Oracle sort of built into the core code of V3. And so, other people can kind of ingest that data, but it's a opinionated Oracle, the way that, we wrote it. And so with V4, it's sort of, with hooks, any pool can essentially determine what that contract looks like. And so you get this sort of hyper customizability. You could have, 10 different pools with each with a different Oracle on them. And, what I imagine seeing is like, there might be some pools very hyper specific to some projects. And so, yeah, that's kind of cool.
Totally. Cool.
Does adding kind of just this level of customization add new attack vectors to Uniswap?
Yeah, I think like that's definitely one thing that we think a lot about, especially, I think going into kind of this like open source phase. I think that's one of the things that's really top of mind. And kind of as we're building the rest in public, we're adding tests, making sure everything is super, super battle tested. But, of course, we wouldn't deploy anything or, want users to use anything that we think is going to introduce anything, any attack vectors. And so I think that's kind of like an ongoing process. But what we've seen so far is that, we feel really confident that this protocol is, we can do this in a secure way.
Got it. What are some of the other, architecture changes that you mentioned?
Yeah, so there's a few other kind of bigger changes from V3 that we introduced with V4. In V3, we saw this sort of factory pair sort of pool deployment. So every pool has its own contract, and it's it's quite a common pattern to have a factory and have it deploy a separate contract per pool. In V4, we actually changed this to use a Singleton model. So there's one contract that holds all of the pool state. And this is really cool. It gives some significant gas benefits. So, for one, the cost of actually creating a pool is actually down probably like, almost like 99%. I think that was like some of the early estimates were showing. So very, very easy to create a pool, which is really great. You can imagine in a world where like hooks probably incentivize people to be creating pools a lot more. I think it's great that we've sort of kind of leaned into this model. But also, we are introducing kind of this new way of how we're doing sort of balance accounting. And what I mean by that is, in V3, to maintain pool solvency, you have to transfer in and out of a contract all of the tokens that you're swapping in or out of. In V4, because we have this kind of Singleton model, we can do net balance accounting. So think like kind of like splitwise. You don't have to do a transfer for every single pool hop or pool trade. You can just do it all at the end. And so that's really cool. There, we'll hopefully see some significant gas benefits from that as well. But yeah, that's what we're calling flash accounting.
Is it like you're able to batch together a number of transactions and then execute them kind of at once?
Yeah, kind of. It's so what's actually happening kind of under the hood is that when you interact with the core protocol, right, you sort of are what we're tracking underneath is how much balance is owed to the pool and how much balance is owed to the user. And instead of having to like kind of transfer each of those every single time on every single action, like if you want to swap and then you want to modify a position, and then you want to swap again, instead of doing a transfer on each of those actions, we can like let the interactor with the pool kind of lock that state, do any kind of amount of arbitrary actions using the pool balance. And then what we do is at the end, check that the pool balance is correct and the user balance is correct. And so we can maintain pool solvency that way. And it just allows us to basically check like the net sort of owed amounts to the user and to the pool.
Is that like, that sounds like more of like a feature for power users? Because I mean, like, basic people they're just swapping, right? Like they just trade tokens.
Yeah. Well, so what this is really, it's a huge improvement in terms of like the gas efficiency. So when you see a really large swap come in, usually what's happening in our router is, our router might say like, hey, actually, to get the best price, we think this, the best swap is going to touch like 5 different pools.
Gotcha.
Right. And so we'll put that forth for users. It'll really seem like it's sort of the same experience as it is today. But under the hood, what's happening is because we don't have to do all those transfers in and out of pools again, we're going to see a lot of gas benefits there.
Gotcha.
So really good for like larger swaps. Even just in terms of, I think one of the other benefits here is it can really aggregate liquidity across a lot of different pools. So because we might see a lot more pools being created, we want to also tap into the liquidity of all those pools. And now this makes it a lot easier to do that because we can touch a lot of different pools quite cheaply.
In terms of the routing, like you have V2, V3, now V4 launching, how will the routing for like on the user interface happen? Like, is it going to just be automatically routed as it is with V2 and V3, or will users be able to delineate like, where they want their transactions to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the kind of like interface level stuff hasn't totally been worked out, sort of an open question, but I imagine it working very similarly to how we do kind of routes in the interface now. Will give a lot of user choice in terms of like, do you want to use like this kind of auto router, or client-side router, API router? And yeah, we'll definitely plug in kind of the V4 related pools into kind of the heuristics of like where trades are routed.
In terms of the capital efficiency for V4, what are we looking at versus V3?
So actually it's a good question. A lot of the same math and same libraries are used in V4. So that part doesn't really change, and it's going to look basically the same as V3 in terms of the kind of expressiveness that LPs have when they choose their position. One thing that's really interesting though, is this sort of maybe ties into like how expressive hooks can be, is you can potentially, write a pool with a hook that, enforces V2 style liquidity and, compounding fees on V2 style liquidity. So, we do have concentrated liquidity. All of that math is there. But if there are use cases that kind of would prefer, enforcing this sort of full range liquidity, you can do that as well.
I see.
Nice. And yeah, I think I will just address that I have my baby on my lap, and you'll see a bit of his head. Yeah, like schedule wise, it like I had to take care of him at this time. So, anyways, hope he behaves. But so I think like an interesting decision with V4 was this choice to build in public, right? So you just like open source the code, and you are inviting developers to contribute to it. So why the decision to do it this way? And I think I've seen a bit of criticism too, because I understand that you still have this 4-year business license, which doesn't allow others to use Uniswap code in that time for profit. So people are saying you're asking us to contribute to the code, but at the same time it is under this business license. So yeah, if you can kind of
yeah, totally. So I think like to address kind of the first piece of that question, kind of open sourcing decisions behind that. I think one thing that when we launched V3, we sort of had the code ready, audited, everything ready to go. It was going to be deployed and usable in the interface within a matter of maybe a month or so after launching it. And I think that's really hard for integrators. They're scrambling to now kind of understand what that interface looks like. What does it mean to kind of now ingest this new protocol? And so I think that's a big part of like also open sourcing V4 early is integrators want to see code early, and I think a part of that too of like releasing it early where there's still a lot of development to core being done is when you actually have integrators like potentially thinking about how they might use it. What you also have is the option and kind of capability to like include some of that feedback into the core code before it's live. And so that was like a really big part. I think another really big part too is that what we've seen V3 come and V2 become is sort of like core infrastructure for Ethereum, and we also think that about V4. And so in that regard, we want to build core infrastructure in public, getting as many eyes and input and feedback, and kind of also just thinking about the security of it as well. Really battle test it with people that want to use this protocol. So I think all of those together kind of pushed us to do the sort of let's build the rest in public. Let's get as many eyes on it and input and feedback, because we all really want to build the best infrastructure we can for Ethereum. And so I think that was kind of to answer your first question. I think to answer the second question, some of these decisions I obviously don't necessarily make myself in terms of licenses and things like that. But I would say that, in the short, in the medium to like long term, we're moving towards a GPL world. And so at that point, this code will become kind of free for people to use. And I think until then, we're not forcing anyone to contribute. It's sort of a contribute if you like. But, obviously, if people don't want to contribute, that's also fine. And I think, for me, I'm already seeing really interesting PRs and things come into the repo and interesting threads and people having, takes on it already on Twitter. And like, we're really excited by that because we're already starting to see things that we didn't think about. And so kind of seeing the value in, community contribution and input, even within the first week.
That makes sense. And so for those contributors, it's all kind of voluntary, what is the benefit? Right. I guess like have that as part of your like track record to have contributed to Uniswap if it does make it into the code, or?
Yeah, I don't really know what drives people. I think some of it is maybe that, but I do think some of it is like, okay, people think this is going to be like core infrastructure, like let's battle test this thing, let's work as a community, and give input to it. Yeah, I also think some people are just, get nerd sniped really easily, and they see something and they want to dig into the code and they want to find bugs, and people like doing this too. So. But yes, it's all voluntary. And yeah, I think it's, similar to like how Ethereum is sort of built in public, right? Like you can contribute, you can go to the calls, you can, listen in and see like where is the development of Ethereum going, and you can, provide input there if you want as well. But, it's all kind of this like mindset of, we want to build really good core infrastructure. How do we do that? Well, we want the masses to help with that.
Is there or will there be a bug bounty?
Yeah, so there's no bug bounty right now because, I'm sure there's probably more bugs in the code. It's not audited code, still being developed. So we usually don't do audits until what we hit is like, code frozen period. And that will, I imagine this is going to be sort of a month-long process of iterating, getting feedback. And there'll be, an audit, and then post-audit, probably a bug bounty.
Is it possible we might see other types of developer incentive initiatives to drive this type of public development? And to kind of follow up on that, would you say that in the long run, OpenSea is kind of trying to position itself as a public good?
Uniswap.
Yeah,
Uniswap.
I think.
All right, sorry.
I think. No worries. I gathered. First question was, sorry, what was the first question again?
Can we perhaps foresee in the future more developer initiatives to drive this sort of development in this space? Please forgive my.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I totally think so. I mean, I think a lot of other projects is, lean into kind of building in the open, building other infrastructure, getting input from the community. I think we'll see a lot of this. And yeah, I do think in some ways we see this as like a public good, right? Like anyone can go today and start, building an interface for this protocol. They can start to build their own routers and their own kind of peripheral contracts, using this infrastructure. There's really no gate there. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so is the expectation that most liquidity will be on V4, or like, do you think that there will be kind of different users, different kind of use cases for each version?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, and I think, something people wondered also when kind of V3 came out. We really can't predict like how liquidity will move. I think there are definitely different use cases for liquidity on V4 versus like V3, V2. I imagine it to be a slower migration than we saw from like V2 to V3, because people are really trying to understand, okay, what are these use cases? There's sort of like an infinite kind of a number of things you can do on V4. And so as we sort of converge on what those best use cases are, I imagine liquidity will move a lot slower. But, again, these, protocols are entirely immutable, not upgradable. They will live, forever. And, there'll probably be liquidity on all of them, and kind of exist in parallel.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like the different use cases that come up, like the things that people build with these hooks. And I think you're right. I think it'll be maybe a more gradual process as these use cases start to be developed. Then liquidity will move rather than just like all at once, because like it looks like the infrastructure itself, like this, like the concentrated pools as kind of the base of it is like the same as V3. So to start, maybe there won't be like such a huge change like we saw from V2 to V3. It'll be just like, the
and
develops on top of it.
Yeah, and I think there will be these like really interesting specific use cases that attract people to V4. And like over time, when we figure out, okay, this works really well, like this hook and this pool and these, you know, assets works really, really well with V4, people will start to kind of move over.
Do you see like, you know, usually when I think of Uniswap, I also think of the interface. Do you feel like there's going to be like a big proliferation of different interfaces to account for all the different pools coming out of? Yeah, right. It seems like
I totally think that's a huge, honestly, opportunity in the space. You know, I think like, yeah, you can do your, you know, everyday kind of swapping on Uniswap, but you know, V4 is really turning itself into sort of a primitive for how do you leverage on-chain liquidity. And so, you know, what people do with that is kind of, you know, build their own pool, build their own hook, build their own interface around that really, really specific kind of a use case for V4. And 100%, I see there being, you know, all kinds of interfaces still leveraging kind of the Uniswap ecosystem there and protocol, but you know, have their own hyper specific use cases. So yeah. I think I'm honestly very excited about that.
Yeah.
We do have a question on the license, which we touched on earlier, but Mitchell is saying, is our plans for a more permissive license? Imagine devs would be more keen to dive in if V4 libraries had an MIT license rather than a
Yeah, I mean, I think V4 Core is set at most of the libs and things in the core repo are set at BSL, which again is moving towards GPL over some time. Some of the, you know, actually all of Periphery and all of the code there is GPL. And so I think, you know, for integrators and things working on hooks and things like that, it's a lot more permissive. And so I think if, you know, you're worried about sort of the licensing, that could be a good area to kind of focus on.
I mean, yeah, a lot of questions. It makes me wish I was more of a developer, but I guess like, so when people are, so I'm trying to remember my question. Like, where does customizing hooks end and contributing to Uniswap V4 start? Like, as a non-developer, like
yeah,
I don't know, is there like a high level
like the kind of lines with what I was just talking about there? Yeah, so I mean, in V3 we have the same sort of repo structure set up of there's core code. This is like essentially what I think about this is like, you can think about it as you know, we have one contract, the pool manager contract, that holds all the pool state, the balances of the pools, everything like that. It's really critical infrastructure. There's all of that is like still open for people to contribute to, but that is the, you know, has the BSL license.
Got it. Okay.
The kind of and we really encourage people to contribute to that as well. Like, I think there's a lot of things and, you know, open issues in our repo, in this core repo, that are still kind of being worked through. And I think the important thing to think of here is like, sometimes the things in core, like, to make the experience better for other developers that are integrating with core, we need to change things in core. And so that's kind of bringing up the story of like, let's get this out early. Let's make sure that what we think is good and what we think is going to be, you know, good for integrators in core is actually good for those integrators. And so there's sort of a lot still that can be worked on in core. When I talk about sort of the periphery contracts, this is where we've put some like kind of example, like what some example integration contracts, like hook contracts, which, you know, core essentially calls out to, might look like. And so all of, you know, the few examples that we've put out so far, we have TWAM, a limit order example, a you know, an Oracle example, all of these things, they're licensed under GPL. So
cool. Okay.
And there's still a lot more things in periphery too that need to be built, and all of these are going to look like, these are the contracts that interact with this pool manager contract, kind of call it, you know, do all of these sort of pool actions on it, but it sort of lives outside of the core contract.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's helpful.
And then to start wrapping up, I think we should address another kind of criticism that has come up for Uniswap, which is, some projects are saying that the code looks a lot like theirs. What are the names? Sorry. Okay, Croc Swap, Shell Protocol, I think Ambient. So there were a few saying, this looks a lot like what we already developed. So I don't know, is there kind of truth to that? Like, did Uniswap take inspiration from these protocols?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to like these specific protocols or protocol names, but I will say, like, I think, what V4 brings to the table is like bringing some ideas that maybe other protocols have had. I'm not sure. Like, I think maybe some of them have had this sort of Singleton contract. I think what V4 is really putting forth is sort of in combination, we think this is a really exciting new novel protocol. In combination with Singleton and with hooks and with flash accounting, and we're doing kind of native ETH, like all of these things together, and like how we've designed it architecturally and what we think it will unlock for all of these different use cases, and seeing it more of as a platform and a primitive rather than this sort of AMM protocol is, I think, where we're like pushing on the innovation there. And I think that's what I would kind of say to that.
Kind of like a holistic gathering of the iteration in the space under one roof that is Uniswap.
Yeah, and I think, I'm, very much excited about like AMM innovation in the space. Like, I want to see that kind of grow, because I think, again, going back to this sort of like, AMMs are this kind of like core infrastructure for Ethereum. A lot still today of the most kind of transactions and in use cases for Ethereum is swapping and things like that. And so I do think, like, as a community, we should be pushing to build the best AMM. And yeah, I think V4 is kind of another step in the right direction.
Very cool. Okay, and then lastly, when should we expect V4 to be actually launched? Like, after this period of building in public, like how long would that take?
Yeah, I mean, this week was really the start of, I think, what's going to be a few months at least of, we still have a lot to build. We don't have like a set date for deployment. We don't even have a set date for an audit or anything like that. And I think a lot of what we're going to be focusing on, post the initial few months of like finishing up code is this, long period of let's battle test this thing. We want to make sure it's, really secure code. But also, we want to leverage some of the gas benefits that might come with using EIP 1153, which introduces transient storage. And that is slated for a future Ethereum hard fork, Cancun. So really, deployment of this thing wouldn't even really happen until after that. Yeah.
Sure. Got it. All right. This was super helpful. Do you guys have any other questions for Sara?
I wonder, like, one of the things that I think of when like a user challenge on Uniswap is slippage. And so I wonder, is V4 going to be able to address slippage in times of great volatility, or is that something that's going to be left for developers to kind of build with their hooks? Is this something like, where do we see that kind of interface?
Yeah, it'll be really similar to V3. Definitely slippage is an important kind of safety parameter for users. It's not something that would kind of change. And yeah, you build this sort of into any kind of routing contracts, kind of tangential to core.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have one more kind of just like would you characterize this as like, is this like the change? Because it seems like Uniswap is heading towards like an infrastructure, more towards infrastructure and less towards kind of a consumer facing brand. Would you say that's accurate? Like characterization of how you guys are thinking about it? I mean, it's just funny because the Uniswap brand is so strong that I'm like what is Uniswap without the unicorn? I definitely
think we're not moving away from the unicorn.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, most of my work I'm on the protocols team. So a lot of what I think about is like protocol level infrastructure and things like that. But there's still a ton of other teams at Uniswap building kind of consumer apps. We launched our mobile app. We have the interface. And so I think all of those things are still kind of, I think important goals for the company. But yeah,
that makes sense. Cool.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much, Sara. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. That was really interesting.
Good to chat with you. This was really fun.
All right. See you soon.
Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that was so good to have Sara talk about Uniswap. I think it's at least a lot clearer for me how this thing is gonna work and like what it brings to the table. And good to see some of the like early criticism addressed. That was nice. Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so let's move on to all the other stuff that happened this week. And markets was a big one. YYC, I don't know if there we go, our markets expert. Okay, so welcome YYC to the stream. Why don't you walk us through what happened in markets this week?
Sure. So it was actually a big week. We had the Fed, obviously, that the decision came out on Wednesday. They decided, as widely expected, that they would leave rates unchanged, and they did. But what caught markets, I think, a little bit off guard is that the Fed's projections for future rates show 2 more rate hikes this year. And I think general consensus was that, this was it. And the Fed would eventually pause this month and then probably stick at this level. Or basically the idea was that interest rates were peaking right now. But these new projections have basically thrown that into question, because the Fed's still saying that inflation is a concern and, 2 more hikes are probably warranted to get things back in check. But in terms of markets, actually, we've seen a complete mix of action, because stock markets have just been flying, right? We've seen the NASDAQ, the S&P hit yearly highs, but crypto, of course, has gone the other way. And we are approaching, I think, in terms of ETH, we hit a 3-month low yesterday. Bitcoin is still holding up far better. And I think that's something we covered in a previous story as well, where Bitcoin dominance is on the rise. So within the crypto ecosystem, it seems like people are dumping their altcoins and moving towards relative safety of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's still really volatile in terms of all the financial assets you could own. But yeah, within crypto, I guess it could be seen as the safe option, right? So, and of course, we had over the weekend, there was an absolute bloodbath in altcoins, and especially the tokens that were mentioned in the SEC's complaint against Coinbase. So we had Matic, Sol, Cardano, a few others that were all hammered 20-30% over the weekend. And this was all kind of huge sells into very thin liquidity over the weekend, when everyone's kind of not really paying attention. So it's, I guess, just a delayed reaction because no one knows what the SEC is going to do next, right? Are they going to take action against these projects? Because they did mention that they reserve the right to do that, I think, in one of the actions that they filed. So, yeah, that's pretty much what's been happening. Binance, of course, is being hit from all sides. Just this morning, they had French authorities are now looking at them for money laundering charges and whatnot. And they've decided to exit the Dutch market. So, Alp, no more Binance for you. So, yeah, one by one, it seems, if the regulators' intent is to make it more difficult for people to interact with crypto, they're succeeding. Arthur Hayes actually put out an article yesterday, one of his long essays that he does, in which he specifically mentioned that, you don't need to outright ban crypto. You just need to make it hard for people to get their money into the system or out of the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on its own, that you can say, hey, you know what, we're open to crypto, we're not banning it, but you do these kind of second tier enforcement actions and cut the legs out from under the system, and it essentially does the same thing, right? So
that's interesting. Yeah, because they haven't. I mean, yeah, the big actions have been against exchanges, right? Not against your Solanas or Maddox or something like that.
yeah, because I think even the SEC understands that it's going to be hard to enforce actions against a lot of these projects whose foundations are in Switzerland, the Caymans, God knows where else, right? So it's going to be expensive. Foreign litigation doesn't even taxpayer money has some value, right? You can't just burn it on serving subpoenas. I mean, look at 3AC.
Yeah.
Teneo's been chasing these guys all over the world,
Right.
and what do they have to show for it? Nothing, right? So
yeah. Didn't they got a yacht at least, right? I thought they did.
yeah. I think I don't think the creditors get the yacht. I think they just missed a payment and the yard kind of repossessed it and sold it to someone else.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Well, somebody got a yacht.
yeah, someone always gets a yacht.
And that's a lesson in crypto, everyone. It's interesting to see that like the SEC is engaging in these activities. They haven't necessarily won any judgments, but just the threat of that action from the agency is enough to send markets into a downward spiral. If I was a Warren Buffett out there, I might be seeing blood in the water. I might be seeing blood on the street. I might be deploying some capital right now. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing people like, BlackRock filed for an ETF, or what they're calling an ETF yesterday, or open-ended fund, or whatever they're calling it. But as long as it has better redemptions than GBTC, I think we'll be better off as a whole, right? So I think rather than getting caught up in the nuance, we should be cheering that, it is the world's biggest asset manager. $9 trillion is we've lost the concept of how much money $1 trillion really is, I think, over the last, 10, 20 years.
It's a lot of sandwiches.
Imagine just 1% in like management fees means they make what, $9 billion a year?
Yeah.
Or 90?
Yeah.
$90 billion a year.
Yeah.
Which is insane, right? Look at the scale of these guys. So, so I think it's a great thing to see traditional finance institutions come in during the bear market, right? Last time around in 2017, we saw everyone pile in. Goldman Sachs said, yeah, we're opening up a crypto trading desk. Everyone's going to be buying Bitcoin. And 2018 market crashed and they all ran away.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's great to see there's still adoption stuff. People are playing around with blockchain, like JP Morgan and stuff is doing things. Swift, the most antiquated institution on the planet, most likely, is experimenting in India with instant settlement of dollar transactions, which is something that's interesting to me because usually the US banking system is very resistant to dollar transactions being settled without them getting a cut, which is why any US dollar wire has to go transit New York, right? It has to hit either, one of the big ones, JPM, Citi, StanChart, whoever. But yeah, so this is an interesting experiment from Swift. And so, yeah, prices are down. Volatility is something we're used to, right, in crypto. I just was discussing this with a few people yesterday. Sentiment actually feels worse to me right now than a year ago when, everything was going to hell and ETH was under $900. Exactly a year ago now, actually, right?
Why do you suppose that is? Is it because there's more driving the sentiment than just price action now?
Yeah, I think it's like people have this thing that, if the governments or like SEC and stuff are cracking down, that's more serious than institutions within the space collapsing because like they went like full on degen, right? Yeah. So I think that's why people are kind of more shaky about it. My real life friends are all like, oh, like, are you okay in crypto and stuff? I've got a lot of calls this week, yeah. I mean, I'm bullish long term. So to me, this is just another opportunity to buy cheap ETH or your coin of choice, especially in altcoins. I mean, everything's been decimated, right? There's so many bargains.
Oh yeah. I think this just sets the stage for the people who are setting up and backing these companies that go into the space and create massive risks to really vet the individuals who they are propping up, because they can have these catastrophic consequences.
Yeah. There's a question here about, do you think the big sellers are institutions or retail? Honestly, I think retail left a long time ago, right? We haven't seen much retail participation as such for the last year, I'd say. To me, it looks like institutions, probably US-based institutions, that feel that, it's not worth the hassle to either hold or have this exposure just in case, the SEC comes knocking. Like, let's say you're an investment fund that you have 100 billion in AUM and maybe 500 million in crypto, which it's not worth the risk of being tagged as a crypto fund just for that 0.5% of exposure, right? So they might just be saying, all right, just clean the books. Let's wait for the dust to settle and then we can revisit the issue.
Right.
Yeah, then there was that news of Celsius liquidating some of those smaller cap coins. I was kind of surprised by that. It seemed like weirdly selective. I don't know. Someone was saying it was like market manipulation, so they were like trying to. I don't really understand or can't understand today.
I mean, maybe they're falling for the FUD too, right? So they think, oh, these things are going to zero. Let's buy Bitcoin and ETH.
Yeah.
Maybe they saw like, hey, the relative value of Bitcoin, because it's at a deficit right now or it's trading down right now, we could probably make more liquidating into Bitcoin while it's low. And then when Bitcoin has this, more resilience, I would say, than a lot of the altcoins, right? Like in terms of volatility, we see Bitcoin kind of rubber banding all over the place. A lot of these altcoins, when we have negative shocks to the marketplace, they struggle a lot of the times to get that same type of elasticity that Bitcoin exhibits. And therefore, for someone in the position of Celsius, it may actually behoove them to be consolidating into Bitcoin, given the relatively dynamic elasticity of it, in contrast to some of these altcoins that they're trading out of.
Absolutely. And who knows how long this whole proceeding will take, right? Maybe they're betting, all right, let's move into Bitcoin and wait for the next bull.
Yeah.
So we can they'll probably do something shady, mark customer balances to 2022 prices and then say, all right, here you go, here's a fiat, we're keeping the rest of the Bitcoin, or something like that.
I think that before that happens, we're likely to see some type of judgment or enforcement action that determines the value of where customers can say, this is our loss, you know what I mean? Because the damages to customers are the basis for any type of enforcement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's who knows how long these things take. Look at Gox, for example.
Yeah.
Right? We're still. When was the hack? 2014.
Yeah. I mean, it's
9 years on. People are still waiting for their Bitcoin. They've missed 2 cycles, and will they be able to participate in the third? Let's hope.
Well, I'll say this: if you're a GOX recipient and you're actually able to cash in on whatever it is, the claim that you have, or however long it takes, and markets are resilient, you may have just been locked into one of the best Bitcoin vaults in the world. It stopped you from trading when prices were down and preserved your share of the markets. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. So let's. I think Cami had to drop off. Baby calls. Right. So I know all too well how that is. Mine are a bit older now, but that the first year, wow, it's like you're at their beck and call, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So
that's how it is.
You may as well make your peace with it. So let's move on to a few more, market stories that we had this week. Owen, you covered both of these, I believe. One is in progress. The first one was, of course, the Flex token, an unlikely winner in the carnage this week.
Yeah. I mean, to summarize very briefly, Open Exchange, which was started by Kyle Davies, Suzu, and a couple other people. I think a guy named Mark Lamb. Obviously, they are part of the, now bankrupt 3AC's hedge fund. They are starting an exchange. One of the assets available on their exchange are bankruptcy claims. They're making them liquid, including claims against Celsius, but also, ironically, their own fund, 3AC, which collapsed. So it's kind of like an insane
That's just crazy to me.
judo move. Yeah. With incredible audacity on a lot of levels. And I don't know the history of the Flex token exactly, but I know that the bottom fell out under that project as well. And then they're bringing it back from the dead and offering conversions to this new token called Ox. And, they're creating all this like mimetic, imagery around it, which, reminds me of some of the stupid stuff we saw in 2021. But that's what they're doing. And at least like the Flex token went up, I think, as kind of there's some news that you'll get some bonuses if you shift over to Ox early, when you stake, you'll get bonuses on the platform. I couldn't quite get anyone to really give us a straight call about why they thought that token was going up. But yeah, it's kind of just like a very strange, I haven't gotten deep into it. But it's just like a very strange phenomena that we've seen. And it's just incredible how people come back seemingly repeatedly. Not only here, Wolf of Wall Street, that guy Jordan, like people just come back, it's kind of amazing. But anyways,
zombie coins, man.
yeah, or zombie people, I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of my high level summary of what's going on over there. I see if you want to clarify anything, but yeah.
Just looking at this screenshot, right, it just shows you 2022 in one image.
Yeah.
It's like everything that went wrong last year is on their website.
Yeah.
And trading their own claims on the exchange, that's a new level of circular crypto logic, to be honest.
No, crazy. I know. And they just dropped a meme coin. It's like, oh my God, like what is, I guess they're just never coming back to the States. Say it again.
I said the Ouroboros of trading here. Yeah. So.
All right. And then moving on to the AWS outage that we had.
Oh, I didn't
Jeremy, do you want to just walk us through that?
Yeah. AWS, a lot of Ethereum servers are tied up in the Amazon web service. So when AWS goes down, it can create issues for Ethereum. And Web3 itself relies on servers and a lot of things like that for infrastructure. So if we have them consolidated in one central service, it actually goes against like the ethos of decentralization, but also can create black swan type events where a network can go down. So, ideally, Ethereum would have more nodes outside of AWS, and the issues that AWS has exhibited are kind of like a warning signal to those who have built infrastructure on some of these Web 2 type of infrastructures that like lack a lot of, I think, the robust network features that we've been told Web 3 is supposed to exhibit.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have two sides of centralization when it comes to Ethereum, at least, right? Which is Lido, for one, which has most of the staked ETH, and cloud providers, not just Amazon, but the entire sector, whether it's Amazon, Microsoft, or whoever. Most of the nodes, 2/3 or so, are in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely a centralized point of failure. Not to say that, all these providers will go down at once, but if they did, you never know, like if there's a wartime scenario or like someone drops an EMP or something. Like it can happen. I mean, obviously, if there's that kind of scenario, I don't think we'd be really too concerned about minting NFTs. More be like running for our lives. But yeah, it could happen.
So I was talking with EtherFi, and they were telling me that a good majority of a lot of these servers are 10 minutes from CIA headquarters. And I'm not trying to say anything clandestine is going to take place, but should the government decide they were going to want to do some type of cyber attack against the Ethereum blockchain, they wouldn't have far to look to initiate such an attack. And they have a large corporate entity that operates within the United States that they may be able to leverage to make that attack possible. So, and again, this is all hypothetical, but it certainly is something that should be taken into account if you're anyone looking to the efficacy of these networks in terms of like robustness against any sort of attack, be it from a government agency, a private institution, a radical institution, what have you.
Yep. No, absolutely. So I think it's a wake-up call, and it's something that the community has been talking about already, right? So it's not like a new concern, but it's just that these outages kind of bring them front and center. And yeah, we should all be running solo nodes, but as it stands currently, it's more lucrative to do it through an LST, and it's far less technically challenging, right? And two things. One, you don't have to worry about, what happens if my internet goes down for a bit, or I'm on vacation or whatnot, right? And your node goes down, I come back home and I'm slashed, right? The second thing is the luck, right? When it comes to, winning like these very juicy blocks, like when there's a big MEV trade or like someone burns a whole bunch of ETH on a mint, that's randomly assigned to a validator, right? When you have someone like Lido who has 500,000, or I don't know how many they have exactly, but how many ever validators they have, if any of those win one of these bounty blocks, it's shared across all, right? So which is why that boosts the overall yield for the whole pool.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's nice to say, yes, I support decentralization. When it comes to putting your money to work, you still want the highest yield, right? You're not going to say, you know what, I'm going to run a solo node, take the stress of, making sure my internet is up to par and on all the time, and earn 4% instead of 8% with Lido. Just the economics don't add up yet.
We've absolutely seen here is the drawing line of defining where people's ethics and their wallets come into conflict with one another. Because if you're looking at the Ethereum blockchain on the staking side of it, a large majority of the staking is consolidated within 5 major networks, Lido and exchanges, and then below that we have Stakefish and some others. All right, and then when you look at it from another perspective, these staking services are all using the same Flashbots MEV protection server. Now, Flashbots automatically censors anything that the OFAC has said don't play with. So now we have a network where a majority of transactions are actually censoring other types of, decentralized services. And this kind of runs in the face of types of things that people have been talking about. This is what Ethereum is supposed to do. And as I've been covering this, and we've seen more and more use of Flashbots because, they make it easy for you to set up MEV in a way that makes you more money. People are just plugging into that thing. And so Flashbots themselves have said, well, we're, working to decentralize this, and we're trying to move away from the idea that we're enabling censorship on the network. But still, because it's more efficient from a capital perspective to just click these boxes and have this thing run, people are doing that rather than saying, I'll take a loss so that the network can be a little bit more decentralized and secure from that perspective.
Yeah, so until those economics shift or at least get closer together, when it's 4% versus 5.5, yes, that it makes it an easier pill to swallow, right? You think, okay, I can sacrifice that tiny bit of yield. Yes, I am contributing to the network, all that. Yes. So anyways, speaking of networks and open governance, let's move on to Lens. Big moves this week or over the last week, right? They just raised 15 million in a seed round on the 8th, I believe. And yesterday they came out with this governance framework. So Jeremy, do you want to just
I'm actually
It's
not
not
up to
but-
speed on the Lens governance framework only because I have been looking at the Prometheum hearings, which I'm about to be providing an in-depth report on, by the way, later today. Keep your eyes peeled. But
All right.
Perhaps you can take us through that.
Sure. At a high level, it borrows a lot from the Ethereum governance process, or rather, the EIP process for adding or improving Ethereum. So
Right.
the idea is that the public or users of Lens and protocols built atop it can put up proposals for enhancements, improvements, changes to the actual Lens core protocol, and then it would be taken up, I guess, for under discussion. And what they've said is, where is it? I think, yeah, it said that proposals that attract widespread support may be incorporated into its roadmap. So pretty similar to Ethereum. And currently, I think there are a few proposals that are essentially housekeeping, I think. So the first one is basically setting up this process, and then the second one is to create some sort of technical standard that would make it easy for developers to build on it, like not having competing proprietary kind of different softwares like we've seen. If you've worked in any major corporate organization, you know it's a mishmash of all kinds of stuff, from especially in banking. I remember when I was working in banking, we had some software that was from the 70s and 80s, just because it was only around for one purpose, didn't kind of integrate with anything else. But because it was too hard to switch, they just kind of been maintaining it and moving it along. So yeah, anyway, so I think it's a good move to have a kind of unified framework. So start from scratch, everyone can build using the same platform. So
That makes sense.
And in terms of regulations, of course, the SEC is just
On a warpath.
absolutely. It's like every day there's some new action or threat of an action or an announcement of a proposed action. Who knows? So, Owen, do you want to just quickly take us through this one?
Yeah. I guess. Oh, that was. Yeah, I'm not. That's again one I not super familiar with, but basically on Tuesday, U.S. federal judge refused to grant the Securities and Exchange Commission's request for a temporary restraining order on the freezing of assets of Binance US. So the SEC had requested that Binance freeze the assets, and then I guess the judge said you couldn't do that. That was one of the regulatory stories today. I can hit a couple of the other ones which I wrote. But
sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Let's
that happened.
Let's find one of those.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I mean, the main thing is that there was a big hearing about the proposed bill to create a lot of clarity around the process by which people can release digital assets, and they can move from the jurisdiction of the SEC to a commodity. And that was put forth by a couple of Congress people, McHenry and Thompson, I believe. And so that was that big hearing that happened. And, it was kind of the same old everything. Like, there's no clarity. Yes, there is. And I mean, there was a lot of nuance, but at a high level, it seems like there's a lot of people kind of talking past each other in various ways. And that seems to just be, that seems to be the trend. I mean, there was, of course, the interesting thing, which Jeremy's working on right now, which is the Prometheum project, which kind of was the, maybe not the odd man out, but definitely, as I watched the hearing, stood out as someone who is obviously very, very much taking the role of the regulations are fine as they are, which a lot of people in crypto disagree with. And maybe, Jeremy, you could speak to that a little
Well,
bit.
I mean, frankly, for the Prometheum platform, to my knowledge, does not actually allow U.S. customers access to any digital products, asset products. So as a result of this, and this is due to the fact that none of these digital assets are registered or something like that, or the digital asset providers or something like that. So they've taken this kind of hardline stance that says the SEC has provided us the clarity around these things, and now it is up for institutions to register with them. However, this is the opposite stance that the company's CEO, Alan Kaplan, had taken years before. And interestingly enough, this is one of the only companies out there that has been able to get licensing from the SEC to some extent to operate. And therefore, it draws into question, like, here's an exchange or a broker-dealer, well, if you will, rather not an exchange, but that does not deal in digital assets, that is saying that we have clarity on digital assets, although they don't deal in them particularly. And now is, so there's a lot of questions about like why they're saying that, what are their motivations behind saying that, and to get to the bottom of it, the Blockchain Association, whom I've been speaking with, has actually set forth a Freedom of Information Act in an attempt to find out what exactly the relationship between the SEC and Prometheum is, and therefore we're going to have to see. The bottom line is a lot of the institutions that have been managing digital assets and making them available to U.S. customers for years now do not believe that there is any clarity from the SEC as an institution or a policymaking agency. And what we can see is from the SEC a tendency to try and engage in enforcement actions rather than create clarity over policy. And so this is something that is likely going to fall to legislators to manage, and it's going to likely get, at least from my perspective, but we shall see.
Yeah, it'll be. I'm not up on what Prometheum is as a company, but I know people looked deeply into them, and they were.
No one knows.
No one knows, right? Yeah.
There's a lot of ambiguity about what actual products and services that they provide, and I've been in touch with them. Alan Kaplan made a statement, to the extent that like the company's been working towards a legal route to operations in the space, but to the extent that they actually have any operations remains to be seen.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, whatever. Just covering them. Yeah, you look at a Slick website. There are some of these companies which look kind of similar and they do business, and then some they may not at all. So it's interesting how that happens.
Yep.
We had a question about the CRV loan. So, Owen, since you are working on a story on that, it seems to be what everyone in DeFi is obsessed about, at least over the last couple of days, right? So,
yeah. So, I mean, high level, a wallet which is basically accepted to be owned by Curve's co-founder, Michael Egorov, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He has a huge position on Aave V2, and he's, I think, something like 170 million of Curve locked up. He's borrowed like 60 mil of USDT. He's made some high profile purchases of some mansions recently. Thank you, Bitcoin TV. So people are concerned that basically that he has a huge amount of CRV, and there's concern that if he's liquidated, and if either the price of Curve falls a lot, he could get liquidated, and there actually isn't enough liquidity for CRV to make those liquidations happen in an orderly manner, which would leave Aave holders or Aave depositors as in V2. Basically, it would stick them with bad debt. There's a little bit of kind of complicated financial mechanics around why that happens, and it's not only the person loaning USDT, but it's actually the whole pool. So, but that's the basic concern, is that he either has no intention of paying it back, or just might get liquidated, and there will be no recourse, because I think YYCU said like the Curve he has locked up is like something like 25% of all the Curve. So the slippage would be insane as people liquidate and try to sell the CRV, potentially pushing him way further down. So 35%. Thanks.
Doing it in bulk is not possible
feasible.
liquidation at all. The only way it can be potentially managed, like you said, is to do it like piecemeal. But again, the markets may not cooperate, right? Because as soon as the position gets close to being liquidated, everyone else who's holding CRV will start dumping it in
Mhm.
anticipation of other people doing the same, right? We've seen that with liquidation cascades across so many tokens, right?
Yeah.
Domino effect.
So
No, and people will hunt the positions. I mean, someone said that, I think perpetuals on CRV shorts spiked a huge amount, the price people are paying on those, as I think people were hunting for CRV to collapse a bit. So
yeah.
it's definitely an interesting dynamic right now.
And someone shared this chat from the Telegram where Michael's saying basically that he's been kicked out of the group that they had with Aave, like the
really?
Curve and Aave Telegram group, before they dropped that proposal.
That's funny.
But according to him, he's saying he can repay and withdraw collateral. So if he has 60 million stables lying around, why not? Right. So
I talked to, and just if it's useful to people, I did talk to Andrew Thurman, who used to work at Nansen, and he said that Michael actively manages that position and doesn't that it's not that he's not actually that concerned about him not paying his USDT back at some point. And AJ of Silo Finance also kind of indicated that maybe Gauntlet was doing something smart by trying to mitigate the risk of bad debt, but people kind of creating this like, oh my God, existential threat for CRV narrative, that those people may have actually just been trying to get CRV for cheap. So, everyone is playing their own game. Obviously, you have to be careful. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, we've already kind of gone over our allocated time, but let's finish up with a bit of NFT news, right? So, everyone thinks NFTs are dead, right? It's been like price-wise, volume-wise, it's been a bad year to be in JPEGs. There's no doubt about that. But the good thing is marketplaces still seem to be building and trying to make the experience easier, trying to get boost their market share and prepare for the next bull run, right? And just yesterday, as Cami mentioned at the beginning of the call, there was an auction at Sotheby's, which was basically 3 Arrows assets being auctioned off by Teneo. Now, just to clarify, these are not the Starry Night Capital NFTs. Those are still sitting in a multisig, as far as I know. So these were NFTs that were being held directly by 3 Arrows, and one of them sold for above $6 million yesterday, which was the Goose, a very rare Ringer NFT from the Art Blocks collection. It has a long history, and it's one of the most coveted pieces in all of Art Blocks, I'd say, right? And the buyer, of course, was none other than Punk 6529, who's no stranger to high-profile buys, right? He also bought the Tulip, the Fidenza, back in 2021. I think it was 1,000 ETH, and at that time, that was the one of the biggest trades for Art Blocks at the time. Great. So yeah, definitely not dead, and it's promising to see projects that are still building, trying to build out new use cases. I've noticed personally volumes and prices picking up a tiny bit over the last couple of weeks across collections. It seems like everyone who moved over to meme coins has now come back. A lot of people got burned jumping into the tail end of that wave, right? Because towards the end of that, I don't want to say it's the end of the cycle, but if it was the end of the cycle, everything that came towards the end was absolute garbage, right? So complete rugs and nothing of real substance. Not that any meme coin had substance, but at least the early ones had the first mover advantage, right? They were new. Everyone was like, "Oh, what's this? Like, let's gamble." By the end, 2 months later, everyone was jaded and just like dumping on each other PvP style. So.
Yeah, we'll see. I think I've seen Punk 6529 say that Safeway, like that most NFTs are going to be like vouchers at Safeway or something. So I do. I think when people think about it, people are just going to think about NFTs way differently. They're not even. I don't think they're going to even use that word in 5 years. So, some of this infrastructure might get used very differently. Sorry, go ahead.
Digital collectibles. That's how we sell it to mainstream, right? And convince them to come buy.
Yeah. That's how Reddit did it, right?
Rare digital goods.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be just like here's a, here's a coupon on your phone. You don't even know what it is. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if real world property starts getting so expensive, people have no choice but to buy like metaverse land, right? This is you can't own it outside, you can own it inside.
Yeah. Jesus, I hope not. All right, I think we're good. Sorry guys, sell all your JPEGs, buy land. I don't know. NFA.
Anyways, so thanks everyone for joining us. It was a great recap of the week. Great chat with Uniswap. I'm sure V4 is going to kind of open up a lot of use cases that we haven't even considered or thought of yet. And and once they come out, we'll be like, oh, that's so simple. Why didn't we,
Yeah.
think of that?
Indeed.
Yeah. All right. Right on. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah. Have a great weekend and see you next week.
All right.
All right. May the price be with you.